Let me now turn to Keynes's secular or long-run explanation for the instability of investment, namely the tendency for the propensity to save to be stronger than the inducement to invest. Once again, uncertainty lies at the heart of this. When the future's uncertain, there will be a permanent bias in people's behavior of both households and firms, towards security. That is, preserving value rather than maximizing value. Keynes believed that bursts of enthusiastic investment were strongly associated with bursts of optimism. People suddenly feel good about things, and there's a rush to investment. But he thought this was not a continuous thing, and it was associated with particular circumstances. In other words, that optimizing behavior that economists talk about depends on optimism, what Keynes called animal spirits. When the feeling of uncertainty increased, people preferred to hoard rather than invest their money. Or as Keynes put it, liquidity preference went up. And it was when it is going up, of course, he said it's very hard for the monetary authority to get long-term rates down in face of this flight into cash. Now, here's, I think, a really interesting thing that links this idea to what's happening today. Keynes thought that rich countries in which capital was abundant, or relatively abundant, were more likely to experience a dearth of investment opportunities than poor countries where it was relatively scarce. However, he would not have at all have been surprised to learn that the main source of saving today was Asia. After all, it was Jevons in the 19th century who described India as the sink of the precious metals. The Indians hoarded gold, the Chinese hoarded silver. In the long span of history, Asia has set the West a permanent deflationary problem because of their very high propensity not to spend their surpluses. The global imbalances which we now all speak of and which Keynes tried to overcome in his rejected plan for a clearing union in the early 40s is the classic is a reappearance of an ancient pattern. Hoarding is the classic response to uncertainty, with hoarding at its greatest when the politics of the area are least predictable, where rule is most arbitrary. So in a sense, the Asian propensity to hoard and not spend is a product of a very long history, and it's been a semi-permanent feature in the development of economics. Now, the second thing that classical economics can't explain. It can't explain the contraction of the US and world economy which followed the financial meltdown of last year. About 4% contraction of the American economy in the last 3 months of 2008, and now unemployment rising to 10% of the workforce. Their models, the models of the classical in the Chicago School, assume continuous or almost continuous full employment based on the rapid adjustment of wages and prices. What most normal people call unemployment, Chicago calls voluntary choice for leisure. Now, Keynes gives us a handle on this. He would agree that a shock, whatever its source, imposes a new equilibrium set of prices and wages. But what he would deny is that market participants can have any knowledge of what this new pattern is when the economy is moving from one state of equilibrium to another. In other words, market participants are forced to trade without knowing what the new equilibrium price is, because the economy is sliding. And under those circumstances, in a graphic phrase, it's as though there is no auctioneer to call out prices before trading starts. Trading goes on, but we don't know what the correct price is, and therefore we don't adjust quickly to what these new prices are. So output losses develop, and once output starts falling, its fall is continuous, cumulative, cumulative as aggregate spending falls in a multiplied way, till a new high employment equilibrium is established. Thus, Keynes provides much the best explanation, in my view, of how unemployment can fall to a low level and mass unemployment persist over a number of years. The classical approach sheds no similar light. If forced to an explanation of so-called sticky prices, the Chicago School blames trade unions or government interferences with the freedom of the market. And they have no understanding of this cumulative process of downturn, which is a normal response of economies to a shock when perfect information about future prices is not known. They assume always that there's perfect information available to all market participants. And of course, something followed from this. I mean, when Keynes argued that in a situation of rapid output decline, it's the government's duty to provide a stimulus, an external source of spending to replace the shortfall in private spending. Chicago economists hate the stimulus. And they invoke against it the hoary old, I don't know, its technical term, Ricardian equivalence theorem. But basically what that says is that if governments spend some money, run deficits, then people will increase their savings in order to, because they know that they'll have to pay that back in taxes in the future. So the net effect is zero. And that's the basic argument against the stimulus by the dominant school of economists. And you should read the blogs that are going on exactly about this. And they're saying, you know, this is all going to be rubbish. The stimulus, all this stimulus is going to do is to land us with a whole pile of unsustainable debt. And one day, the governments are either, very soon, the governments are going to have to raise taxes, or if they're wicked, inflate away the debt. Well, now, I think there is a debate about this, and I'd like to take issue a little bit with what David Brooks said, because I don't think the debt is unsustainable. I think it depends very much on what happens to the economy. Now, if you believe that the economy isn't going to recover, then, of course, the debt will become unsustainable in the sense that governments will have to raise taxes in order to bring it down. But I think that stories about the national debt running out of control, are just alarmist. And those stories completely neglect to point out that the debt shrinks automatically as a proportion of GDP when wealth grows, as tax revenues rise faster than GDP. Let me offer a simple arithmetic illustration of that. An annual inflation rate of 2%, that's not exactly inflating away the debt, that's the target 2% that most central banks set. An annual inflation rate of 2% accompanied by balanced budgets. We assume balanced budgets at this point in the recovery phase, and a modest annual rate of growth of 2% in the economy would bring down indebtedness of 100% of GDP back to 50% in 16 years. That is, it would shrink it automatically without any changes in taxes whatsoever. Now, if you want to bring it down more quickly, the economy would either have to grow faster or taxes would have to go up. But we've had debt of much greater than this in the past, and it's always shrunk, not just by inflating away, but by the growth of the economy. And that's true in any household. If you have a debt at one income level and your income level doubles, your debt as a proportion of income is halved. I mean, that's very, very, very straightforward. And yet, it's always ignored. In other words, to sum up this bit of the argument, fiscal prudence depends on not falling into great big holes. If you want to be fiscally prudent and run balanced budgets, make sure that the economy doesn't go down in the way it has gone down in the last year and a half. And Keynes was in favor of fiscal prudence. Keynes thought budgets should be balanced normally. But he also believed in policies that would maintain demand at a high level.